Vikings fans, to another edition of Vikings on SI. Jonathan Harrison here, joined once again by Will Ragatz for another 5 matchups Thursday. We took a week off, obviously, for the bye, but now we're back at it, and no better way to come out of the bye than a massive matchup, Will Ragatz. Vikings-Lions, 5-0 Vikings, 4-1 Lions. Lions coming off a just shellacking of the Dallas Cowboys at the weekend, though they did lose presumptive at this point in the season Defensive Player of the Year Aiden Hutchinson to a season-long injury, so that will certainly impact, I would assume, the matchups we're going to talk about today. But let's jump right into this, because this is a huge matchup that I know the NFL world will be watching with great anticipation on Sunday at US Bank Stadium. What is your number one matchup that will impact the outcome of the game on Sunday between the Vikings and Lions?
Yeah, you said it. This is just a huge game, a really fun way to come out of the bye week, a really fun game for the first matchup at US Bank Stadium in about a month since that Texans game. So, yeah, a lot of anticipation already building for this one this week. This is going to be really fun. I could have gone in a lot of directions with these 5 matchups, but the one I have to start with, and I know we do this a lot, but it's Brian Flores against Ben Johnson, and it has to be, because it is about as fascinating as it gets. We've talked week in and week out about these chess matches between Flores defense and all of the things that they do with disguise and complexity and you know, switching up the tendencies that they've put on tape and just making them really hard to play against. The Lions offense is the same way in a lot of ways. Like, they have a ton of things that they can do. They have a great offensive line. They have the playmakers to make it all work. They're about as creative offensively as you will see. I mean, last week against the Cowboys, I wasn't watching the game, but I kept seeing clips of their throwing hook and ladders to offensive linemen, and they're just doing all these ridiculous things. And I know they were up huge on the Cowboys, so that gave them a little leeway to mess around, but they've always been just really not afraid to kind of stretch the boundaries of creativity. I mean, they had that hook and ladder touchdown earlier this season. Like, the Vikings have to be prepared for anything, and I just think this is going to be such a fascinating matchup between these two coaches and what are maybe the 2 best units in the NFL. If you were to rank the 64 sides of the ball, the Lions offense and the Vikings defense might be the top 2 right now. So it's just as good as it gets. And Brian Flores with a great quote this week that he wants to fight fire with fire. So I expect to see some fireworks at US Bank Stadium on Sunday when the Lions have the ball.
It's like you've been a pro at this forever, because that was going to be my question coming off of this. When Brian Flores says he plans to fight fire with fire, he was talking about in that press conference the aggressive mentality that Kevin O'Connell has and how he would go up against that as a play caller on the defensive side, and considering who he's going up against in Ben Johnson. He said he plans to fight fire with fire. What do you think he means by that, and what should Vikings fans expect out of that quote, and what that might mean for the defense this weekend?
Well, I think you should expect, more of what we've seen since Flores has been the defensive coordinator. They're not going to sit back and just try to react to what the Lions do and let them come to them and then try to figure it out. They want to set the tone in their own right and take the fight to the Lions and be the aggressor. And I think that's what's going to make this such an interesting back and forth. The Vikings have to figure out, okay, when do we want to try to blitz Goff and send extra pressure? When do we want to show pressure and then drop? When do we want to do this and this and this? Because, as we'll talk about in a second, I mean, Goff has been playing at a really high level, operating this Ben Johnson offense. So it's just the chess match, the back and forth, and to fight fire with fire, you got to bring the heat. And I think we're going to see that from Brian Flores. He's not going to be passive. He's not going to, be in awe of what the Lions have done. He's got to have some tricks up his sleeve. Let's say that.
I don't think the Vikings are going to be able to rely on turnovers as much as they have been the previous 5 weeks, because through 5 weeks of the season so far, the Lions have only allowed 4 turnovers on the offensive side of the ball, while the Vikings, they've taken away the ball 13 times. That's certainly going to those 2 stats and those 2 play styles are going to butt heads this weekend. It'll be certainly interesting to see which one kind of bends to that will. What's your number 2 matchup for this weekend?
Yeah, I want to stay on the same side of the ball and kind of focus on Goff a little bit more. He obviously a couple weeks ago 18 of 18 against the Seahawks. I think last week he was 18 of 25. The week before that, I mean, he's completing well over 80% of his passes the last 3 weeks, and just really looking confident and in total control of this offense. So beyond the schematics of Ben Johnson and Brian Flores, that's all great. They're going to put those plans into place and they're going to make adjustments and they're going to call the game. It's going to come down to the players executing it, and that's what I like to focus on as well. And I think a big part of that is going to be, how does Jared Goff play against this Vikings defense? I've phrased this as kind of Goff against the Vikings defense, with also the crowd noise mixed in as a factor, because the last time we saw the Vikings play at US Bank Stadium, CJ Stroud, one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, was really flustered by a lot of the things that the Vikings were doing defensively and also by the crowd noise. And maybe it was, I suppose it was more his offensive line at times who was getting flustered, but pre-snap penalty after pre-snap penalty, the atmosphere was ridiculous. The atmosphere is only going to continue to grow for this game when it's the Lions in town, number one seed in the NFC on the line. But fans have missed watching this team over the bye week. Like, this is going to be the ultimate atmosphere at US Bank Stadium. I'm looking forward to it. We'll see how Goff and the Lions handle that noise, and then how they handle just all the playmakers that the Vikings have on the defensive side of the ball, from the edge rushers and Van Ginkel to the inside backers, and even if Blake Cashman doesn't play, I mean, Ivan Pace Jr., Kamu Grugier-Hill, to the three safeties and the corners, and just all the guys that the Vikings have that have been playing so well. So, yeah, that's my second matchup, is how Goff and the Lions offense handle all of this.
Goff last year against the Vikings in the 2 games against Brian Flores' defense. Now, obviously, a very different looking defense than what the Vikings put out on the field last year, but completed 73% of his passes, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions, only sacked 2 times in both of those games against the Vikings last season. So that will certainly be a very interesting battle that the Vikings will have to shut down this weekend, because, as you mentioned, Goff has been excellent this season, controlling the ball, not giving it away, and playing very safe with it, and controlling one of the more dynamic, best offenses in the league. What's your number 3 matchup that will impact the game on Sunday?
Yeah, you kind of just segued into it. It's I got one more on the same side of the ball, and it's Jonathan Grenard against Penei Sewell. And more broadly, I think the Vikings attacking the Lions' offensive line, which is maybe the best in all of football. Just across the board, they are really, really stout. But Penei Sewell is probably he's the star and the biggest name on that line. He plays right tackle about as well as anybody in the league. And he's going to be seeing a lot of Jonathan Grenard, who is the only player in the league. It was him and Aiden Hutchinson. He's the only player in the league with at least 5 pressures in every game this year. He leads the Vikings by a lot in that respect. And it's just going to be his toughest matchup of the season by a lot. Like, if Grenard can get to his 5 pressures this week and keep that streak going, that alone would be impressive, given how good Penei Sewell is. Grenard is not, he's no slouch for sure. He's on pace to have a Pro Bowl type season. He had the 3 sacks against the Texans last time we saw the Vikings at home. So I'm keeping an eye on 58 and how he can do against Penei Sewell throughout this game. And he won't strictly be lined up there, but that figures to be his matchup a lot of the time. And the Vikings really need to find some ways to get pressure on Goff, ideally without having to blitz 6 or 7 to do it.
Do we expect Brian Flores to send more blitzes, or how do you expect him to attack, as you said, one of the best offensive lines in the league? Because we've seen Detroit start to develop, or been developing, this offensive line for a number of years now, and they really are the best at protecting the quarterback. Only allowed 9 sacks, I believe, all season long. It has been an incredible mark for them. Do we expect more blitzes, or how do we expect Brian Flores to kind of attack that offensive line and get at Jared Goff?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I imagine we will see some for sure, because it's a Brian Flores defense. But this is a tricky matchup, because if you send a lot of guys, Goff's good enough to not panic against the blitz.
Mm-hmm.
He's experienced. He could get the ball out of his hands quickly and find his drop off to Jahmyr Gibbs or David Montgomery or Sam Laporta, Amon-Ra St. Brown, whoever. And then you don't have as many numbers in coverage. But if you drop a lot into coverage and you're rushing 3 or you're rushing 4, it's going to be hard to get home against that offensive line. So I think it has to be about well-timed blitzes, disguised looks, all the things that Flores tries to do and does do successfully as a game planner and play caller. I mean, this is the toughest matchup of the year on that side of the ball. So it's got to be about picking the right spots for those blitzes. And the Brian Flores and Jared Goff. There's a fun history there dating back to the 2018 Super Bowl,
Yes.
Rams Patriots. But like you mentioned last year, Goff was fairly successful and didn't get sacked very much at all. So this is a different Vikings defense, but it's going to be a big challenge for them.
Absolutely. All right, I have the feeling we're going to switch sides of the ball, so let's get to matchup number 4 that will impact Sunday's game between the Vikings and the Lions. The first of 2 tests between these two teams. The next one coming the final week of the season, which if these two teams are going to match up and be the class of the NFC, you couldn't ask for a better way to close out the end of the season than with these two teams. But we're starting with week 7 right now, and let's get that number 4 matchup.
Yeah, that week 18 matchup, I mean, you could be talking about winner is the number 1 seed in the NFC, or you could be talking about it means nothing. But we'll see. That's a ways away. Right now in this game, the winner is the number 1 of the NFC. So that's what we're focusing on. This would have been obviously Aiden Hutchinson related because he has just been far and away the best player on the Lions defense and arguably the best player in the league defensively. I mean, I think 45 pressures he has through 5 games, which is ridiculous. That's 9 absurd. A game. Like, it's kind of unheard of, the start that he was off of. So devastating on a just human level and football level for a guy who's playing that well to suffer such a serious injury, and hope he's able to come back as good as ever next year. But with Hutchinson out, the matchup that draws my eye and some of the players I'm looking at on that side of the ball are the Lions safeties. Brian Branch and Kirby Joseph. They have been arguably the best safety duo in the NFL so far this year. You look at PFF grades, these guys are at 89.8 and 88.1. Just really elite grades. They've combined for 7 interceptions so far. They have all 7 of the Lions picks. These guys are good in run defense, good in coverage. They're really versatile. They're just playmakers. And I know Vikings fans don't like Kirby Joseph very much because of the whole TJ Hawkinson situation last December, but he's a very good player, a very dangerous player. I think he's picked off Aaron Rodgers. He's gotten a few times, or somebody. He has been very good to start his career. And Brian Branch, who they drafted in that big, I think 2022 class a few years ago, has been really, really good as well. So I'm looking at Sam Darnold going against that safety duo who are playmakers, ball hawks, and just the need and the importance of taking care of the football for Darnold and the Vikings this weekend. It's always essential, but against a team that's this good as the Lions are, you can't give their offense extra opportunities and give them even some short field opportunities potentially. The Vikings have to be able to move the ball, control the clock on their own, try to keep their defense off the field as much as possible, and really be able to put up some points in a game where you know that as good as Brian Flores' defense is, the Lions' offense is going to put up some points as well.
Absolutely will. And you mentioned the need to control the ball. Sam Darnold coming off probably his worst 6 quarters of the season, had the bye to kind of reset. Hopefully we'll see that this weekend against the Lions, and no bigger test than a Lions defense that's rated 5th in points allowed this season and 6th in yards allowed. So this is a team and they coming off of 5 turnovers last weekend against the Dallas Cowboys. This team is ready to go, especially against a NFC North competition. All right, the 5th and final matchup you're watching for this weekend.
Yeah, it's just to be clear, I mean, this is still a very good Lions defense. Even losing their best player really hurts, but we shouldn't be assuming that this defense was all Aiden Hutchinson. It's well coached with Aaron Glenn. They've got guys at all 3 levels who can make plays. I don't know who's rushing the passer for them off the edge now. I'm looking at their PFF pressure numbers, and among edge rushers, Aiden Hutchinson's got 45 pressures. Second is Marcus Davenport with 7. I don't think he's played since week 2.
I think he's injured for the season.
Is he out for the year?
Yeah.
Which that checks out. So then it's Josh Pascal, I think, is going to be stepping into a bigger role. He's got 6 pressures in the 5 games. So the edges are a serious question. But my last matchup here is, I don't want to necessarily phrase it as Ed Ingram's last stand, but it almost feels like it in some way with the Reisner news this week, and with hearing from Reisner in the locker room talking about how he's 100% healthy and he's ready to go. It feels like within a game or two, like I think they're going to want to ramp Reisner up because he hasn't played since training camp, and you don't just necessarily want to throw him out there. But if Ed Ingram continues to struggle in pass protection, like it's going to become a decision at some point. And the other area where you look on this Lions defense that could be dangerous is the interior of their defensive line. And a lot of teams seem to have these good defensive tackles, but the Lions just gave Aleem McNeil a big contract extension this week. I think 4 years, 90+ million, something like that. He's a very good player. Levi Onwuzurike is another guy who can rush the passer from the defensive tackle spot. And then DJ Reader, their big nose tackle, is quite good as well. Not as much of a pass rusher, but those 3 are imposing in the middle of the D-line. So Garrett Bradbury, as usual, Ed Ingram, we're going to be keeping an eye on those guys, because if the Lions are going to get pressure on Sam Darnold and affect him that way, it feels like it's going to come from blitzes or from the interior, and not as much from the outside when you don't have Aiden Hutchinson, you don't have Marcus Davenport, and obviously the Vikings, as we know, have 2 very good offensive tackles.
Yeah, I'd imagine they'd want to see what they have in Dalton Reisner if they're going to move on from Ed Ingram before the trade deadline, because if they're not convinced that Dalton Reisner can do it, you might as well try and make a trade at the trade deadline. I mean, Brandon Scherf's name, we've mentioned his name a couple times. Jacksonville's 1-5 on the season. That's a team that has already sold some parts already in the trade market. They could be out there to sell again, and Brandon Scherf would be the ideal name at guard to fit in if you're not convinced with what you have in Reisner or Ingram. So, yeah, as you mentioned, I'd imagine they'd want to see what they have in Reisner before the trade deadline to see if they have to go out and make a big trade. I'm just disappointed, Will, that you didn't mention the kicker battle. This is going to be one heck of a kickoff between Jake Bates and Will Reichard, who are 2 of the better kickers in the NFC North, if not the league, with how they perform this season. That's the only critique I have for 5 matchups
that's good.
Thursday.
That's the bonus 6th one, the 2 rookie kickers who are studs.
Who can kick the heck out of the ball.
Reichard still hasn't missed, and we're not trying to jinx anything here, but he's been very, very good. And it wouldn't shock me to see maybe the game come down to a kick from one of those guys.
Man, the tension from Vikings fans if the game comes down to a kick for the battle for the NFC North at this early point in the season would be incredible.
Tension from me trying to write my recap in the press box.
Yes, that too.
I'm used to it. I did that literally every game until 2022, so it's fine.
The Vikings press room has PTSD from that 2022 season, having to change things at the last minute due to all those late games.
100%.
Well, good stuff from you. We will talk to you tomorrow right back here on the Bring Me the Sports channel. We'll make our predictions as a staff. I'm sure Tony will probably predict another loss because he hasn't predicted a win yet this season. And he's 0 for 5 so far. We'll see how long he keeps the shtick going. But good stuff from you today. Minnesota Vikings fans, Minnesota sports fans, be sure to hit the subscribe button. It does help our channel get found. Also notifies you every time we do post a new video here on the Bring Me the Sports YouTube channel. We'll talk to you tomorrow.